The fog hadn't burned off yet when Sergeant Jessica Williams stepped out of the company building, coffee in one hand, clipboard tucked under her arm out of habit more than necessity. She knew the morning report by heart. She always did. Fort Hood in early March was a study in gray. Gray sky, gray motor pool, soldiers in gray PT gear jogging in loose formation past the rows of HMMWVs. Jessica had been at this for 16 years, long enough that the cold didn't bother her anymore. Not really. It was just weather. Everything else was the job. She found Staff Sergeant Reyes by the arms room, going over the weapons sign-out sheet with the bored precision of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Williams. He didn't look up. New LTs here, showed up 20 minutes early. Good sign or bad sign? Depends who you ask. Jessica had heard plenty about 2nd Lieutenant David Mitchell before he'd ever set foot in 2nd Platoon's company area. Fresh out of basic officer leader course, top of his class, the kind of officer who quoted field manuals the way other people quoted scripture. None of that worried her. She'd broken in green lieutenants before. What worried her, a little, was the look in Reyes's eyes when he said it. She found Mitchell in the platoon office, standing very straight, reviewing a roster like it might be graded. He was younger than she expected, 24, maybe 25, with the unmarked, eager face of someone who hadn't yet learned what the Army actually looked like once you got past the regulations. Sergeant Williams. He extended a hand. Firm grip, correct posture. Good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot. All bad, I hope. Keeps people honest. She shook his hand. Welcome to 2nd Platoon, sir. He almost smiled. Almost. I've been reading through the platoon's records. I want to understand where things stand before I start making changes. Before I start making changes. Jessica filed that away without comment. Every new lieutenant said some version of that sentence. The good ones figured out eventually that the platoon had been running long before they arrived and would keep running long after they left. That their job wasn't to remake it, but to learn it. Sounds like a plan, sir. Formation's at 0630. I'll walk you through who's who. Formation that morning looked, to anyone watching from a distance, like any other. 30-some soldiers in 2 ragged lines, breath fogging in the cold. Staff Sergeant Reyes calling the roll in his flat, unhurried voice. Mitchell stood beside Jessica with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the way a man watches a system he's trying to memorize. Jessica wasn't watching the formation as a whole. She was watching Private First Class Maria Torres. Torres stood in the 2nd row, 3rd from the left, and from 20 feet away, she looked fine. Uniform squared away, chin level, present, and accounted for. But Jessica had spent 16 years learning to read soldiers the way other people read weather, and what she saw in Torres that morning was a kind of stillness that didn't belong to a 23-year-old who, a month ago, had been cracking jokes at PT and badgering her squad leader about weekend passes. Torres's eyes were fixed somewhere past the formation, on nothing. Her hands, at her sides, were balled into loose fists. "Private Torres," Reyes called. "Here, Sergeant." A beat too late. A half-second that nobody else in the world would have noticed. Jessica noticed. After formation broke and the platoon scattered toward the motor pool, Jessica caught Torres's elbow, light, almost casual. "Torres, walk with me a second. I've got vehicle checks, Sergeant. They'll keep." Jessica fell into step beside her, matching her pace, not slowing her down, not making it a production. "You good?" "I'm good, Sergeant." Torres said it fast, the way people say things they've already decided not to talk about. Jessica let it sit for a moment. She'd learned a long time ago that silence did more work than questions, that most soldiers would rather walk into traffic than admit, out loud, in daylight, that something at home was falling apart. Pushing too hard just taught them to get better at hiding it. "All right," Jessica said finally. "You know where my office is. It's a folding chair, Sergeant. Best office on this post." That got the faintest twitch of a smile out of Torres. Gone almost as soon as it appeared, but real. "Door's always open. Chair too," Torres nodded and peeled off toward the motor pool without another word, and Jessica watched her go, filing the moment away the same place she filed everything. Not forgotten, just waiting. It was Mitchell who brought it up, an hour later, watching from the office window as Jessica let a private off with nothing more than a quiet word after he showed up to vehicle maintenance, 11 minutes late. "Sergeant Williams, can I ask you something?" "Always, sir." "That private was late. No counseling statement, no correction in front of the squad, just—" He gestured vaguely toward the window. "A conversation. He's got a sick kid at home and a wife who works nights. He told his squad leader. His squad leader told me." Jessica didn't look up from the supply log she was reviewing. "He'll make up the time. He always does." Mitchell was quiet for a moment, and Jessica could see him working through it, trying to fit what he'd just watched into what the manuals had taught him discipline was supposed to look like. "I just want to make sure standards don't slip," he said finally. "That's all." Jessica closed the log and looked at him, not unkindly, but steady. "Standards don't slip around here, sir. They just don't always look the way you expect." Mitchell nodded, the way people nod when they're not actually convinced, and went back to his roster. Jessica watched him go, then glanced once more out the window, toward the motor pool, toward where Torres was bent over an engine compartment that didn't need nearly as much attention as she was giving it. Folding chair's always open, Jessica thought. Question is whether she'll ever sit in it. The call came in on a Tuesday, 3 days after formation, and Jessica didn't know about it until Thursday, which was, in its own way, exactly the problem. She found out from specialist Renee Combs, Torres's roommate in the barracks, who caught Jessica outside the dining facility with the particular hesitation of someone who wasn't sure she was doing the right thing by talking. "Sergeant Williams, got a second?" "For you, always." Jessica stepped out of the lunch line traffic, reading Combs's face before she said another word. "What's going on?" "It's probably nothing. It's not my business to say anything." Combs glanced over her shoulder, lowered her voice. "But Maria's been on the phone every night this week, crying, some of it. I don't think she knows I can hear through the wall." "She say anything to you directly?" "Just that her mom's sick, real sick. That's all she'd tell me, and only because I asked twice." Combs shifted her weight. "She made me promise not to say anything to anybody. I'm probably breaking that promise right now." "You're not breaking anything. You're looking out for a battle buddy. That's the job too." Jessica meant it, and she said it plainly enough that Combs's shoulders came down half an inch. "I appreciate you telling me." She didn't go to Torres directly. Not yet. Jessica had learned, over 16 years, that a soldier cornered with the truth before she was ready to give it would only build the wall higher. Instead, she made a few quiet calls of her own, to the family readiness contact, to a friend in finance who owed her a favor, careful and discreet, the way she did everything that mattered. What she found by Friday afternoon was worse than she'd expected, and simpler than she'd feared. Torres's mother, back in Laredo, had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer 2 months earlier. The family didn't have insurance worth much. Torres's stepfather drove trucks, on and off, and the gaps between jobs meant gaps in coverage. Torres had been sending home most of her paycheck since the diagnosis, and when that hadn't covered a recent round of treatment, she'd taken out a loan from a company that advertised on late-night television and charged interest rates that bordered on predatory. Jessica had seen the type before. Soldiers were easy targets, steady paychecks, young enough to not know better, proud enough not to ask. Torres hadn't told her chain of command any of it. Not Reyes, not Mitchell, not Jessica. She just kept showing up, doing the job, falling apart by inches where she thought no one was watching. The cracks showed up in small ways first. Tuesday. Torres missed a torque spec on a brake job during routine maintenance. The kind of mistake a soldier with 18 months in the platoon shouldn't make. The kind that gets flagged in an inspection. Wednesday. She was 4 minutes late to PT formation, no excuse offered. Thursday, her squad leader, Sergeant Patel, reported that Torres had snapped at a private half her age over something trivial. loud enough that half the bay heard it. None of it was catastrophic on its own. All of it together was a pattern, and patterns were exactly the kind of things Second Lieutenant Mitchell had been trained to notice. He noticed. Sergeant Williams. He found her in the platoon office Thursday evening, a manila folder in his hand, his face carrying the particular firmness of a man who believed he was doing something right. I want to talk about Private Torres. Go ahead, sir. 3 incidents this week. Missed maintenance standard, tardiness, conduct toward a subordinate soldier. I've started a counseling packet. He set the folder on the desk between them. I think it's time we document this formally and put her on a corrective path. If it continues, we may need to consider further action. Jessica looked at the folder without picking it up. You talked to her yet? Ask her what's going on. I asked Sergeant Patel for a statement on the conduct incident. That's standard procedure. That's not what I asked. Mitchell's jaw tightened, just slightly. Sergeant, I respect what you do here, the relationships you've built, but I can't run a platoon on instinct and informal conversations. There's a process for a reason. If we let this slide because we feel sympathetic, we're not doing her any favors. We're letting a pattern get worse. There was something almost reasonable in the way he said it, and that was what made it hard to argue with outright. Jessica had heard versions of this speech from a dozen lieutenants over the years, and some of them had even been right, eventually, about something. She didn't think Mitchell was wrong to notice. She thought he was about to be wrong about what to do with it. Give me until tomorrow before you submit that, she said. 24 hours. That's all I'm asking. For what? To find out what's actually happening before we put it in writing and make it permanent. Mitchell studied her for a long moment, not hostile, but unconvinced, weighing the request against everything the manuals had told him a good officer should do. 24 hours, he said finally. Then it goes up the chain, Sergeant. I mean that. Understood, sir. He left the folder on the desk when he walked out, and Jessica sat looking at it for a long while before she finally picked up the phone. Jessica found Mitchell in the company office at 0700 the next morning, exactly where she expected him. Early, reviewing paperwork, the manila folder squared at a precise right angle to the edge of his desk. You said 24 hours, sir. She closed the door behind her, which she rarely did. I'm here to use them. Mitchell set down his pen. I'm listening. Jessica pulled the spare chair around and sat, not behind any desk, just across from him, soldier to soldier rather than report to officer. Torres's mother has cancer, stage 3, diagnosed 2 months ago, back in Laredo. Torres has been sending home most of her pay and took out a loan from one of those finance companies that prey on E3s and E4s, the kind that charge 30% interest and call it a service fee. She hasn't told her squad leader. She hasn't told you. She sure as hell hasn't told me directly. I had to go around her to find out, because that's usually how it works with the good ones. They don't ask for help. They just keep showing up until they can't. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, processing. How do you know all this? Because it's my job to know it, sir. Not officially. Nobody puts that in a counseling packet. But if you want to lead soldiers, really lead them, not just manage their paperwork, you have to know what's underneath the numbers. A missed torque spec isn't the problem. It's a symptom. I understand that people have things going on outside of work, Sergeant. I'm not heartless. But at some point we have to hold the line on standards, or the whole platoon learns that excuses get accepted instead of corrected. He leaned forward slightly. If I let this slide because of a sympathetic story, what happens the next time someone has a sympathetic story? Where's the line? The line isn't sliding standards, sir. The line is knowing the difference between a soldier who doesn't care and a soldier who's drowning. Torres isn't failing because she's lazy or because she thinks she can get away with it. She's failing because she's terrified and alone and doesn't know how to ask for help without feeling like she's letting everyone down. You put corrective paperwork on that. You're not fixing the problem. You're confirming her worst fear, that nobody actually has her back. Mitchell didn't answer right away. Jessica let the silence stretch, the way she'd learned to, because she knew that arguments people talked themselves into stuck better than ones they were talked into by someone else. Can I tell you something, sir? Something I don't say much. He nodded, cautious. 16 years ago, I was a specialist at Fort Bragg, 22 years old, and my father had a stroke back home in Georgia. Bad one. My mother couldn't work, couldn't drive him to appointments, couldn't keep the lights on most months. I didn't tell anybody. I figured it was my problem to carry, figured asking for help made me look like I couldn't hack it. Jessica's voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it, old and worn smooth like a stone handled too many times to still have sharp edges. I started missing things, showing up late, snapping at people who didn't deserve it. My platoon sergeant could have written me up, would have been justified. Instead, she pulled me into her office, asked me one question, "What's actually going on?" And then she sat there and listened until I told her the truth. What happened? She walked me through Army emergency relief that same week, got me emergency leave to go home and get things settled, helped me set up an allotment so my mother had steady money instead of whatever I could scrape together each month. Took her maybe 6 hours of her own time, total, across 2 weeks. I stayed in the Army because of those 6 hours, sir. I'd already started writing my separation paperwork in my head. She never knew that. I never told her. Mitchell sat back, and something in his posture had shifted, some of the rigidity loosening, just slightly. So you're saying I should let it go? I'm saying paperwork doesn't fix what's broken, and what's broken here isn't Torres's discipline. It's a financial mess and a family crisis she's been carrying alone because she's too proud and too scared to put her hand up. Jessica leaned forward. Give me through the field exercise this week. Let me get her connected to AER. Get the leave process started. Get her actual help instead of a counseling statement that follows her career around for the next 10 years. If she doesn't turn it around after that, if this is a pattern instead of a crisis, then you do what you need to do, and I won't say a word against it. Mitchell was silent for a long moment, looking at the folder on his desk like it had gotten heavier somehow. 24 hours becomes a week, Sergeant. That's a lot of rope. It's the right amount of rope, sir. And if you're wrong, then I'm wrong, and you write it up, and I won't have a single word to say about it. Jessica held his eyes. But I'm not wrong, sir. Not about this one. Mitchell exhaled, slow, and slid the folder into his desk drawer rather than his outbox. 1 week. And Sergeant, you're spending a lot of credibility on this private. I hope she's worth it. They're all worth it, sir. That's the job. Jessica didn't get the chance to find Torres that day. By the time she made it to the motor pool, word had already reached her second hand, the way the worst news always seemed to travel. Through Combs, white-faced, jogging across the lot to catch her. Sergeant Williams. Maria got a call this morning. Her mom's in the hospital. Something with her white blood cell count. The doctors are worried about an infection from the chemo. Combs was talking fast, breathless. She didn't say 2 words after she hung up. Just went and signed out for first formation. Jessica found the field exercise roster pinned outside the company office, the mandatory 2-day land navigation and recovery training set to kick off that evening at 1800. Every soldier in 2nd Platoon required to attend. No exceptions without command approval. Torres's name was still on it, but when Jessica checked the sign-out log an hour later, Torres had already left post. Not through proper channels, not through Jessica, not through anyone. She'd simply gone, driven 4 hours toward Laredo on her own, leaving behind a half-written note to her squad leader and a field exercise she had no authorization to miss. Jessica stood in the empty barracks room, the note in her hand, and felt the particular cold of watching someone she was trying to help make exactly the kind of mistake that would undo everything. Jessica called Torres 4 times before she picked up. It was the 5th call, somewhere past noon, that connected, the line crackling with road noise, an 18-wheeler audible in the background, Torres's voice flat and braced for whatever was coming. Private Torres, this is Sergeant Williams. A long pause. Sergeant, I know I'm in trouble. I'll take whatever's coming when I get back. I had to go. My mom's in the hospital and I couldn't sit in a formation pretending everything's fine while she might be. Her voice cracked and she stopped herself, hard, the way people do when they've decided crying isn't allowed yet. I'm not calling about trouble, Jessica said. I'm calling because I want you to pull over. Sergeant. Pull over, Torres. I'm not telling you to turn around. I'm telling you to pull over so we can talk like two people instead of you driving 80 miles an hour with your hands shaking. There was a long pause. Then the road noise dropped. The click of a turn signal. Gravel under tires. Okay, I'm stopped. Good. Now listen to me. Jessica kept her voice even, steady, the same tone she'd have used talking a soldier through a stuck weapon or a vehicle rollover. Calm because the situation didn't need more heat poured onto it. Your mother needs you, nobody's arguing that. But you driving into Laredo exhausted, off the radar, AWOL from a mandatory exercise, doesn't help her. It puts you in a hole that's going to be a lot harder to climb out of than the one you're already in. And it doesn't get you there any faster than doing this the right way would. There is no right way. I asked, Sergeant. Back in January, I asked about emergency leave and got told it wasn't approved because we didn't have anything documented, and there wasn't a unit minister available to verify, and a dozen other reasons that didn't mean anything to me except no. That landed harder than Jessica expected, and she filed it away. A thread to pull on later. A system that had failed this soldier once already. That was January. This is now, and I'm not some E6 at the personnel office telling you no over the phone. I'm telling you to come back to post. Tonight. I will personally walk emergency leave paperwork through every office on this base if I have to, and I will have you on a flight to Laredo inside of 48 hours, properly, with your job and your career still intact when you get there. But I need you here to do that. I can't process leave for a soldier who's gone dark on a 4-hour drive with no comms plan. The silence on the line stretched long enough that Jessica wondered if the call had dropped. You'll really do that, Torres said finally. Not quite a question. I've never lied to you, Torres. Not once. I'm not starting now. She came back. It took convincing, and a promise from Jessica that she'd be on Torres's flight manifest within 2 days no matter what. But by 1700, Torres was back on post, hollow-eyed and exhausted, climbing into the back of a truck with the rest of 2nd Platoon as they rolled out for the night land navigation exercise. Jessica hadn't planned on pulling her from the field. A soldier who'd just driven 4 hours and back in a single day, gone 12 hours without real sleep, carrying that much weight. Under different circumstances, Jessica might have sent her straight to quarters. But the exercise was mandatory. Mitchell's week of rope was already stretched thin, and something in Jessica's gut told her that sending Torres alone to an empty barracks room to sit with her fear all night was worse than keeping her busy, surrounded by people, until the leave paperwork came through. The training area west of post was a maze of scrub brush, dry creek beds, and one stretch of river crossing that had claimed more than a few stuck vehicles over the years. By 2200, the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and the platoon was working through a vehicle recovery scenario in the dark. A HMMWV deliberately staged in a low water crossing, soldiers running tow cable and recovery procedures by red lens flashlight while Reyes called out the standards from the bank. Jessica watched from the edge of the exercise, the way she always did, eyes moving across the soldiers rather than the equipment. Torres was on the cable team, moving slower than usual, her exhaustion visible in the way she fumbled the second connection on the tow shackle. It happened fast, the way these things always did. The HMMWV's tires lost purchase on the slick creek bed, the vehicle's weight shifting as the recovery vehicle began its pull, and the embankment, softer than anyone had accounted for, churned to mud by 2 hours of boots and tires, gave way beneath the front wheels. The vehicle lurched sideways, sliding toward the deeper water, the tow cable suddenly under live tension with 2 soldiers still crouched near the connection point. One of them was Torres. "Cable! Clear the cable, now!" Jessica's voice cut across the dark before she'd consciously decided to move, already running down the bank, 16 years of training collapsing into pure instinct. "Torres! Get back! Get back!" Torres froze for half a second, the half second that mattered, exhaustion slowing what should have been automatic, and Jessica reached her before the cable went taut, grabbing her by the back of her vest and hauling her bodily away from the connection point, both of them going down hard into the mud as the HMMWV's recovery vehicle stalled out, the cable snapping slack just feet from where they'd been kneeling. The second soldier, PFC Daniels, scrambled clear on his own, breathing hard. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the training area exploded into controlled motion. Reyes shouting instructions, the recovery vehicle repositioning, soldiers restaging the cable from a safer angle. Jessica was already up, checking Torres for injuries with quick, practiced hands, finding nothing worse than mud and a scraped palm. "You good? Torres, look at me. You good?" Torres was shaking, and not from the cold. "I froze. I froze, Sergeant." "You're exhausted, and you've been running on fear since this morning. That's not freezing, that's being human." Jessica helped her to her feet, kept a hand on her shoulder, steady. "It's over. You're okay." It was Mitchell who reached them next, having sprinted the length of the exercise lane, his flashlight beam jumping wildly in the dark before settling on the two of them. "Sergeant Williams." He stopped, taking in the scene. The slack cable, the mud. Jessica's hand still steady on Torres's shoulder. "What happened?" Embankment gave way under the vehicle. Cable went live with soldiers still on it. Handled. Jessica said it simply. No embellishment. Already moving past it the way she moved past everything, because there was a soldier in front of her who needed steadier ground than an after-action review. Mitchell stood there for a moment, and in the red lens dark, Jessica saw something settle into his face. Not shock exactly, but a kind of recognition. The look of a man watching for the first time what 16 years of instinct actually looked like under pressure. No raised voice that mattered, no speech, no time for one. Just movement that was already correct before anyone had time to think. "Get her to the medic, get her checked," Jessica said. "I've got it from here, sir." 20 minutes later, wrapped in a wool blanket near the medic truck, the adrenaline finally draining out of her in long, shaking breaths, Torres looked up at Jessica with an expression that had nothing left to protect. "I should have told someone, about my mom, about the loan." Her voice was small, stripped of the brittleness it had carried for weeks. "I kept thinking if I just held it together long enough, it would all sort itself out, and if I asked for help, it meant I couldn't hack it. That I didn't deserve to be here. You deserve to be here, Torres. You've deserved it the whole time." Jessica crouched down to her level, the way she always did, so nobody ever had to look up at her to be heard. Holding it together alone isn't strength. It's just isolation with better posture. You hear me? Torres nodded, tears finally coming, quiet and exhausted rather than dramatic. "I'm sorry, for all of it. Don't be sorry. Be ready to let people help you tomorrow. That's all I need from you." Behind them, a few yards off, Mitchell stood watching, the manila folder in his desk drawer, feeling, suddenly, like the least useful thing he'd ever written. The morning after the field exercise, Jessica was at the Army Community Service office before it opened, waiting outside the glass doors with a folder of her own. Not corrective paperwork, but DD Form 1380's, AER application forms, and a Red Cross emergency communication request she'd half filled out from memory the night before. By 0800, she had Torres sitting across from an AER caseworker named Mrs. Hutchins, a woman Jessica had worked with a dozen times over the years, who listened to Torres's situation with the unhurried patience of someone who'd heard every version of it and still took each one seriously. "The loan's the first thing we fix," Hutchins said, scanning the paperwork. 31% interest is criminal, frankly, and AER exists for exactly this. We pay it off directly, no interest, repayment terms based on what you can actually afford month to month. That stops the bleeding today. Torres stared at the paperwork like she didn't quite trust it to be real. "That's it? It's just done?" "That's it. This is what it's for, Private." Hutchins slid a second form across the desk. "Now, let's talk about getting you home." The Red Cross message went out by mid-morning, verified through the hospital in Laredo within the hour. Torres's mother's condition serious but stable, the infection responding to treatment, the kind of update that wasn't a miracle but was, for the first time in days, not getting worse. Emergency leave was approved by 1400. By Saturday evening, Torres was on a flight out of Killeen, a week's worth of pay advance in her account, and an AER caseworker's card in her wallet for when she landed. Jessica drove her to the airport herself. "Call when you land," Jessica said, pulling up to the curb. "Not because you have to, because I want to know you got there." Torres nodded, gripping her bag strap, and for a moment looked like she might say something else, something bigger, something about gratitude or guilt, or all the weeks she'd spent thinking nobody would understand. Instead, she just said, "Thank you, Sergeant." And Jessica understood that the words were carrying all of it anyway. "Go be with your mom. The platoon will be here." Mitchell found Jessica in the platoon office 2 days later, the manila folder still sitting in his desk drawer where he'd left it, untouched and increasingly irrelevant. "I owe you an apology, Sergeant." He said it plainly, without preamble, standing the way he had the first morning they'd met, straight-backed, but something in his face had changed in the 2 weeks since. "I was ready to write up a soldier who needed help, not correction, and I almost did it because the paperwork made more sense to me than the person. You held off when it mattered, sir. That's what counts. I held off because you made me." He shook his head slightly. "I watched you pull her off that cable before I'd even registered what was happening. I watched you talk her down on the phone, get her on a flight, get that loan paid off in a single morning through a system I didn't even know existed until you walked me through it. 16 years of knowing how to actually do this job, and none of it's in the field manual. Some of it is, most of it isn't." Jessica leaned back in her chair. "The manual tells you what right looks like. It doesn't tell you how to find out what's actually wrong before you start grading someone against it." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "I'd like you to teach me. Not as a formality. I mean it. How you read a formation, how you know who's drowning before they say a word, how you build the kind of trust that gets a roommate to come find you instead of staying quiet." He paused. "I came in thinking the platoon ran on regulations I hadn't fully gotten people to follow yet. I'm starting to understand it runs on something else, and you're the one holding it." "I'd like that, sir." Jessica almost smiled. "Took most lieutenants a full deployment to ask. You got there in 2 weeks. That's not nothing." 3 weeks later, Torres was back in formation, second row, third from the left, her mother home from the hospital and beginning a long course of follow-up treatment that nobody pretended would be easy. There was no clean ending to any of it. No remission announced, no crisis fully resolved. Just a daughter who'd been given the chance to sit at her mother's bedside instead of finding out secondhand from 4 hours away, and a debt that no longer ate her alive every time she opened her bank account. Formation that morning looked, to anyone watching from a distance, like any other morning. Reyes called the roll in his flat, unhurried voice. Mitchell stood at the front with his hands clasped behind his back, more relaxed now than he'd been his first week, though still straight-backed out of habit. Jessica stood where she always stood, eyes moving across the formation, reading what the roster never could. After formation broke, Torres lingered a moment instead of heading straight to the motor pool. "Sergeant Williams, got a second?" "For you, always." Jessica fell into step beside her, the same unhurried pace as that first gray morning weeks ago, except this time Torres didn't pull away, and she didn't rush to fill the silence with a lie about being fine. "I just wanted to say thank you. Properly. Not in an airport." "You already did, Torres." "I know. I wanted to say it again." Torres managed a small, real smile. "Folding chairs always open, huh? Best office on this post." Jessica smiled back, and they walked together toward the motor pool. Just 2 soldiers in a platoon that, once again, looked like nothing remarkable at all, except for the woman at its center who'd spent 16 years making sure it never had to be anything else. That's the story of Sergeant Jessica Williams, the soldier who never wore rank like a wall, but like an open door. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story moved you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and we'll see you in the next one.